Hello, and thank you to Whole School Sen for the opportunity to present on behalf of BATOD. I'll be speaking to the session objectives in the context of deaf children and young people, and it's excellent an opportunity to join my peers from VIEW and PDNet in the conversation about the needs of low incidence cohorts. Throughout this very brief presentation on deaf children and young people, deaf learners, a low incidence but quite often high needs cohort, I'll be outlining the support role of the qualified teacher of the deaf in meeting the needs of this cohort and their support to you as part of the team around the child. I'll be sharing some statistics and highlight some of the points for consideration for the individual needs of deaf children and young people, and include some points for conversations regarding technology. So my name is Teresa Quail. I'm a qualified teacher of the deaf. I'm an education audiologist, and I work part-time as a co-national executive officer for BATOD. BATOD, the British Association of Teachers of the Deaf, is a not-for-profit organisation, is a sole organisation supporting teachers of the deaf across the UK. We have 1,300 plus members. Many members are qualified teachers of the deaf. Some members are support staff, some are speech and language therapists, and others are allied professionals associated with deaf education. So a wealth of knowledge and expertise and experience within the association should you reach out to us with any questions. Like VIEW, BATOD offers specialist CPD training resources, and BATOD often engages with a range of organisations, including the government and charity groups, about the needs of the profession and the needs of deaf children and young people. Throughout this presentation, I'll be using the terms deaf and identification. As Sarah touched upon earlier, it's important to have the conversations with parents, children and young people and the professionals around the language that's used, and thinking about the social model and the medical model, and allowing children and young people and families the opportunity to engage in those conversations and identify which term they would prefer to use. BATOD, like other organisations such as the National Deaf Children's Society and NDCS, use the term deaf to denote all levels of deafness, as from mild to profound, as bilateral in terms of both ears, or unilateral single-sided deafness, as well as permanent and temporary forms of deafness. I've inserted a publication by BATOD President Martine Monksfield, Deaf Teacher of the Deaf, and Danny Sibb, Head Teacher of Frank Barnes School for the Deaf in London, a Deaf Teacher of the Deaf. And it's a document that you may wish to use within your settings, within your service, to have the conversations, to start those conversations with others. BATOD recognises fully that it is down to the personal preference of the individual about which label they use for themselves for their identity. And identification here is used in the context of instead of diagnosis. So I'm not going to repeat what's already been captured within the Whole School Sen Handbook. So if you're not already aware, pages 154 to 158 outline information on meeting the needs of deaf learners. And there's an excellent insert for the points of consideration around the working memory of deaf learners on page 22. In this presentation, I'll just reflect on other aspects. And I wish to note that there are other organisations not referenced in the handbook that offer some advice and support to families, children, young people, and quite often professionals. So those organisations, they may be specific to a type of deafness or to an etiology in terms of cause of deafness. And there's also organisations who support multi-sensory impairment, so MSI, that is children and young people who are deaf with vision impairment, or they may see themselves as being who have a vision impairment who are deaf, or may also be referred to as being deafblind. So in terms of the professionals, I will be emphasising the role of the teacher of the deaf. The teacher of the deaf is a qualified teacher who, like qualified teachers of VI, vision impairment, and qualified teachers of MSI, multisensory impairment, will have completed the mandatory qualification for deaf education and vision impairment and multisensory impairment education respectively. So upon successful completion of that mandatory qualification, the specialist teachers are then qualified to work across the ages from birth to 25. A majority of the qualified teachers of the deaf that you may meet will most likely be employed by your local authority and work in a peripatetic peri role. So as a first point of contact regarding the needs of the learners within your setting will be that teacher of the deaf team. Some teachers of the deaf may be based in a school because your school has got a resource provision for deaf learners. Some teachers of the deaf that you may work with or may have awareness of may be employed by the NHS because they are working in the auditory implant service. And some children and young people may be engaging with charity organisations that are offering specialist interventions. And that will be subject to the needs of the deaf child, young person and their families. So the qualified teacher of the deaf role, the specialist role, is an important professional role because due to newborn hearing screening process, a child may be identified as deaf from birth. So the teacher of the deaf involvement begins very early on. And in that early stage, at post-identification stage, the teacher of the deaf then works with the family and the parents, often coaching and modelling strategies to support the communication and language and social emotional development of the deaf baby and the child or then child. They'll undertake specialist assessments to advise and recommend possible next steps of intervention support. And they'll also interpret those results from the audiology appointments in those early stages following identification. Many parents of deaf children are hearing, so 9 out of 10 parents of deaf children are hearing, and they may never have had any prior experience of deafness within their own family or within their local community. So the teacher of the deaf may assist with their understanding of those results, of all the reports, the medical jargon, and the key part of the teacher of the deaf is to support the confidence of the parents to engage as an equal partner in those conversations about their deaf baby, their deaf child. Then in later years, it's the role of the teacher of the deaf to support the staff and more so work alongside the child, young person to help them understand what this information means about them and help them be able to advocate successfully and independently for themselves. So throughout the education stages of the deaf child, young person, the teachers of the deaf may carry out a range of specialist assessments, and that information and the summary of the results will be captured in the teacher of the deaf report. Those teacher of the deaf reports then will be available to you within your school setting via your Senco. They're quite often recorded on your information service system, and those teacher of the deaf reports will feed into the SEND support plans and the education healthcare plans. So some teachers of the deaf, depending on the individual needs of the learner, may offer direct teaching, one-to-one small group work, and some may be more in advisory capacity. So the teacher of the deaf, like yourselves, are a key partner within that team around the child and young person. In terms of deaf learners in England, what do we know about deaf learners? The CRIDE, the Consortium for Research in Deaf Education, in January 2022 published their 2021 data. So we know that there are at least 45,000 deaf children in England. And in terms of busting some myths, not all deaf children sign. So the CRIDE report suggests that in education, 2% of the learners are known to be deaf will use British Sign Language, BSL. British Sign Language is a language in its own right and has a language structure that is different to English. The report suggests that 7% of those known deaf learners may use sign support alongside spoken English. So perhaps for a majority of deaf learners that you'll be supporting now or in the future, they may be using more of an auditory approach. The communication choice of the child and young person should be made by the family, the child, the young person, on the unbiased information being made available to them to make informed decisions. So also thinking about the learners, all deaf children have education healthcare plans. No, that is not the case. Of the data available in the published in 2022, it's indicated that nearly 4/5 of deaf children are being supported through SEND support plans. So it's really important that the collaborative multi-agency work between the teacher of the deaf, yourselves, the support staff, the professionals in the NHS and in social care, if social care involvement is required, is as effective as possible to get it right for the child, young person from the earliest stages. So thinking about the deaf learner, as for all learners, there's a communication cycle in terms of the relationship between the expressive and receptive language. So the use of the words, the use of the sentences, having been able to express themselves so that they and kind of join conversations appropriately, that they can be understood, and then also being able to understand the information that's been presented to them. So when there's a kink in the chain, in the communication chain, for deaf learners, that's an ability to listen, hear, that has an impact on the rest of the chain. So this is why the role of the specialist teacher of the deaf is extremely important for helping the child and young person make progress in their academic and social emotional skills and development. So the teacher of the deaf may offer guidance and support to meet the academic, social, emotional needs of the individual deaf child and young person. And it's really important that the deaf child and young person from the earliest ages recognises the impact of deafness for what it means for them, and that you are aware of and recognise which strategies they can use to be able to minimise the potential impact of the deafness on their communication cycle. I noted earlier that the role of the qualified teacher of the deaf can begin shortly after birth, and the latest CRI data suggests and indicated that in terms of referrals into local authority services, 1/4 of those referrals came through the newborn hearing screening process. So if a baby when born does not pass the newborn hearing screening process, they're referred to audiology, and deafness is identified, a referral is made with parental consent to the local education services, and then a teacher of the deaf will make in contact with that family within 2 working days. So the interventions start within the home and have the potential to support the deaf child, the deaf baby, to make progress towards age-appropriate development in language development, communication development, social emotional development from the earliest stages. 3/4 of the referrals by services in 2022 were outside of the newborn hearing screening process. So that may be that the child had a mild level of deafness that was picked up through the newborn hearing screening process, or they became deaf after birth. So how does a teacher of the deaf get involved? Alongside the observations made by the family, it's the observations made by you in the classroom in your educational setting that is really important, because perhaps you've noticed a change in behaviour, perhaps you've noticed a change in speech production or lack of progress in some areas of communication that lead you to suspect that a referral to audiology services is needed. So on the slide, I've included guidance for the support for professionals and support for parents if you suspect that a child may be deaf. There's not the time today to cover this slide, but it's more to have the awareness that there's different types of deafness, there's different causes of deafness and different profiles of deafness. So whilst the child and the young person themselves may be able to explain what their deafness means to what their deafness profile is, and as to might the parent thinking about the principle for only telling it once, it's having been aware and reading in advance the information is already available to you within your school setting via your SEND code, through the education healthcare plans, the SEND support plans, through the teacher of the deaf reports. The teacher of the deaf that's associated with your school or your SEND code may be able to help you to understand the words, the terminologies presented within the reports and what it means specific to the learner that you are supporting. It's really important, though, that there's the opportunity for the deaf learner to be able to understand these words so that they can understand what's happening inside the audiology appointments or the conversation with other professionals. In terms of this slide, though, I would like to draw your attention to the etiology aspect in terms of causes for deafness. For some families, they may, through a series of medical investigations, learn about the cause for deafness for their child, but for many, they may never know because in terms of genetic testing, hasn't been designed yet. So there's one etiology, CCMV, congenital cycloregular virus, that for the staff in early years and primary school settings or pregnant staff that you may like to be aware of and go and research further yourself, because CMV itself is really important for the awareness around pregnant staff in terms of pregnant mums visiting your setting. And June is CMV Action Month, so there's something that your school may wish to, or you yourselves as staff may wish to explore learning more about, because CMV is one of the common causes of deafness, and it has the potential to be avoided through following certain strategies. So also for the early years and primary school staff present here today, you may come across, in terms of a type of deafness, blue ear, which is a conductive type of deafness and is quite common among younger children, and I'd recommend looking through the links and learning more about that there. And before I move on to the next slide, I just really want to draw your attention about the need of sensitivity around when deafness is in existence alongside other medical and additional needs. For some families who are already managing known medical needs or other special educational needs, identification of deafness may answer questions for them, but for some parents it may take them some time to process and accept the identification of deafness. So, how is deafness as information presented? In the audiology reports in your child's file, there's quite likely an audiogram that will have a range of X and O's to represent the 2 ears. That'll indicate the level of deafness or the level of hearing for in each ear for the child. You will find that there's maybe most people present here today, there's typical hearing in terms of normal hearing, and that will be represented in the decibel range of 0 to 20. In terms of mild levels of deafness, again, we're using the UK audiometric descriptors here. You will have the considerations in thinking about when it comes to mild levels of deafness and the kind of natural noise, background noise generated in a working classroom due to peer-to-peer learning. What might they be missing out on? So thinking here, when you take a look at the speech banana, where some of the speech sounds associated with English language are present across different frequencies. Due to the subject to the actual individual's audiogram, they may be missing some of the high frequency sounds, or they may be missing some of the sounds that are really key to the information carrying part of the words. Also then thinking as well, when it comes to the other level of deafness, what impact that has when unaided. But also just to draw your attention for moderate deafness, I've had some experience through my times at teaching, as my time as a teacher of the deaf, that maybe for some of our older key stage 2 students and for some of our teenage students who want to reject the technology and reject their hearing aids, they will feel that they can hear. And it's really important then that there's opportunities made available for them to have the conversations so that go, yes, you can hear, but to have the understanding of exactly what it is they can hear and what it is they will struggle to hear and in which situations. And if they're going to reject their technology, what strategies are they going to put in place that will help them to minimize the situations where they mishear information, which will have an impact in the classroom, but will also have an impact within their social situations with their peers. So then thinking about what strategies are available to them and which ones will they consider using at what stages and when. In terms of severe levels of deafness, some individuals may make a very effective use of hearing aids, and they may use other forms of sign communication or visual communication to support the optimal use of their hearing aids. For some individuals with some levels of severe levels of deafness or profound levels of deafness, it may be that there's not optimal access provided to the hearing aids, and they may meet criteria for a cochlear implant. The cochlear implant then will give them access to the speech sounds, but is not a magic switch. It does not make them hearing. And it's the conversations take place with the teachers of the deaf, the family, the child, the young person, to help them have the understanding, if they do choose to use a cochlear implant, what's involved in terms of the habilitation stages, the listening stages, and what strategies need to be considered and implemented to make effective use of those cochlear implants, but recognise the limitations of the cochlear implants too. So I've inserted a slide that you can look and follow the YouTube link in your own time to have an understanding what it might sound like in terms of different levels of hearing, different levels of deafness as a hearing individual. So communication, and again, we don't have time to cover today, but it's awareness that there are different communication options. And in the past, it might have been viewed that it was an either or, so that it was you're either or, you sign communication. Individuals now should be given the opportunity to make their informed decisions about whether they want to choose a combination of communication strategies for both the receptive and the productive, or using differently for the receptive and or productive. So just again, then when you're reading your the information available for the child that you're supporting in your class, or you are having conversations with the teachers deaf and other professionals, think about the impact of the deafness and the communication. Having that awareness within the classroom environment, regardless of whether they use sign or they're auditory oral, they're listening alone, they're going to be relying on lip reading, and they're even if they're really good and use their hearing aid technology or their sign only, there's going to be an impact on their concentration fatigue. And Dr. Helen Willis's slide towards the end has an excellent presentation on her research, as she's a deaf researcher, on the listening fatigue of cochlear implant users. And her research, she notes, is quite similar in findings for what's available with the listening fatigue for hearing aid users as well. And it's also then thinking as well within your classroom environment, when you're thinking about the design of activities, is allowing the learner, regardless of their communication strategies or communication approaches, to processing time, to allow them time to take in the words that's been presented to them, to try and identify what they can understand or what it might seem similar to in words they might be familiar with already, and then how does it link to their already existing mental model of understanding of the curriculum topic that you are teaching. And then what does that mean then in terms of the language they can use to be able to express themselves back to that will then reflect their own level of understanding. So in terms of specialist technology, and for the assistive listening technology to be used, the specialist technology has to be in place. So the majority of individuals that you meet as deaf learners may be using hearing aid technology. Some individuals may use cochlear implants. Those with conductive type of deafness may be using bone conduction devices, or may actually have the operation for BAHA. And so also having the awareness that hearing aids can support access through listening, but they have their own limitations as well. And also I've just included in the bottom right hand side of the screen awareness of a bone conduction device that will be available in the market in 2022 that parents can buy directly themselves, and is for younger children who have glue ear. So you might see this turning up within your early year setting or your lower school part of primary school setting as well. So please do look at that link more. So the assistive listening technology is designed to be able to help overcome the effects of background noise. So when the teacher or the presenter, the speaker, is using the assistive listening technology for the individual, the child, the young person, the teacher could be quite a few meters away, but they will feel as if they are within that 15 to 20 centimeters distance away. So it can help overcome background noise. Some children and young people may reject it for a number of reasons, and one of the key reasons that they report rejecting it can be just down to the ineffective use by staff. So if you have a learner coming in your class in September, or you have a learner in your class who may become eligible for assistive listening technology, I'd recommend taking the time to understand how to use it, how it works, because your effective use of that technology might help maintain the child, the young person, using it effectively too. So as this is a whistle-stop presentation on deaf education in terms of thinking about deaf learners, children and young people, I just put down some points for you to consider whenever you're thinking about the Teach the Deaf report and you're thinking about that learner within your school environment, within your classroom context. I've included also an article that is written by Dr. Kate Rowley, a deaf researcher, and Danny Siv, the deaf teacher of the deaf, head teacher of Frank Barnes School for the Deaf, that discusses how language deprivation can be prevented in deaf learners regardless of the communication profile. So you might be interested in reading that and having that as a further discussion alongside the professional peers that you work with. Also thinking as well with the upcoming exam season, thinking about the now and for the future, is having that established working practice in place for those children and young people who are eligible for access support in examinations, so that they are familiar with how to implement it optimally for their needs. And again, which is really important because of the fact that the deaf children miss out on that incidental learning that their hearing peers are exposed to all the time, is then thinking about what opportunities can be put in place for the deaf learner to have established healthy relationships with their peers and have the opportunity to form strong friendships with others. So this is again where your local Teach the Deaf team will be able to advise on strategies that would be beneficial for your school setting, for the learners in your setting. Thinking about the fact that it's often said that a deaf-friendly classroom can benefit many others in the classroom, alongside the deaf teaching strategies that would be recommended by the teacher of the deaf and that are available on the websites being suggested at the end of the presentation. You might also want to think about the actual acoustics in your classroom, and maybe have you tried a sound field system, because not only will it benefit the deaf learners in terms of the evidence and the research, it'll benefit children who have EAL, it benefits other learners in the classroom who may be struggling with literacy, because the teacher's voice is presented at the same level in the classroom regardless of where the teacher's positioned. That means it also has the benefit of supporting you, the teacher, in terms of the strain in your voice. There are examples included on the link, but there's also some companies that are quite often quite open to trial and allowing settings to trial their technology. And as I come to the end of the presentation, just a few slides to go, I really want to emphasise that your role is really invaluable in the team around the child. So the natural setup of how each education phases works has many strengths that really benefit the deaf child, young person being able to make progress. But thinking about the deaf child, young person in your setting, in your classroom, I've put some questions down just so that as a school you can reflect on what can be done to maybe improve the experiences, what works well, even better if. And then thinking about if there is a deaf child in your setting where you can go for help. So I've listed the examples here. So then thinking whilst the child and the young person and the parent are the experts, thinking about the tell it once approach, where can you get that information in advance so you can understand as much as possible about what is needed to know for helping the child who's deaf in your class. You can always reach out to us in BATOD. Your first point of contact for specific needs for the learner in your class should be the teacher of the deaf team in your local area. Just to highlight, the Deaf Ed forum is free for you to join. It has been designed that it is open as an email platform that is open to any professional supporting children and young people in deaf education. And then just to think as we come to the end of the presentation, when you have the deaf learner in your classroom, just go back to the ABCs. Are reasonable adjustments in place within the classroom and within the playground, within the school setting for the learner? If there's a change in behaviour, what does that change in behaviour potentially mean? Is it an indication that you have a child who could be deaf in your class? Is it an indication that there's actually another additional need that has been undiagnosed? Is there something that the child is having difficulty in terms of expressing, in terms of social emotional needs, or something happening in terms of a situation being bullied, etc.? So I have been really keeping an eagle eye on that changes in behaviour and discussing it with others about what it could mean, alongside also talking with the child, young person and the family. Again, as I went through, emphasised and tried this presentation, communication is it's really key that the information provided to the child, young person and family is unbiased and enables them to make their informed decisions at the time for them. Advocacy being in place so that they can indicate what works for them, and quite often your classrooms are those safe spaces that they can feel confident to be able to express to a trusted adult what works and what potentially could be improved just to enhance their experience, enhance their access to learning. And it's just also being mindful that every child is different and every deaf child is different. So what's the background story? Is their hearing aid later for reasons that is part of their backstory? In terms of their backstory for the deaf child themselves, do they understand about their own deafness? Do they understand what it means for them? Do they feel confident in their identity? How can they be supported? And again, your local teacher of the deaf can support with this. And then thinking about in terms of their identity, can they identify with characters in the curriculum in the books that you use in your curriculum, in the role model you use in your curriculum? And just having those considerations of just some ABCs are coming back to. So as we come to the end of this presentation, I want to say thank you very much. It has very much been a very brief review about deaf children and young people. A low incidence cohort, but quite often high needs cohort. So do reach out to your local teacher of the deaf team, and BATOD will always welcome any questions that you want to pose to us. Thank you very much for listening.